Welcome everyone, Mindy here with you today, and I'm going to be sharing a card that I created using one of the new stamps from the Pretty Pink Posh November 2018 release. Here is a look at the stamp sets that I'll be using. The poinsettia stamp on the right is the new stamp set, and I'm also going to be using something off of the Angel Friends stamp set, so I just wanted to show you that real quick. Since I am going to be doing some ink blending, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock. This is really great for ink blending, whether you're using distress inks or the distress oxides. I'll be using the distress oxides today. So I need to start out by heat embossing my floral images. So I just lined those up onto my Misty Door, and then I'm inking them up with the Versamark ink. And you want to be sure to prep your cardstock with an anti-static powder tool. That will help so that the embossing powder doesn't stick where you don't want it to. So I just prepped that really quick, stamped that down really well, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the embossing powder on here. I'm not going to heat it up just yet because I don't want my paper bent up. I just want to be able to see where my embossed lines are. So I'm just sprinkling on that embossing powder, tapping off the excess back into my container, and then I'm going to line this back up into my Misty, being super careful not to bump those flowers. If you're more comfortable heating that up right away, you certainly can. I just didn't want it to bend or warp my paper, which makes it a little more difficult. So I had just turned my paper, stamped more of those flowers on the other half of my paper, and then sprinkling on that white embossing powder again. We're going to be doing an Emboss Resist. So when I apply the ink, this white embossing powder is going to resist that ink. So I'm just heating this up with my heat tool. I had it warming up off on the side, which is usually a really good habit to get into so that it's nice and hot when you come to your paper. So I'm just going to set that off on the side to cool, and I'm going to do the exact same thing for the leaves. I wanted to make sure that I had enough to play with for the front of my card since I knew I wanted to make this an entire background. So doing the same thing, using the Bristol Smooth cardstock, prepping that with the anti-static powder tool, stamping all of the leaves down. So I did use everything off of the poinsettia stamp set. So creating a background is a really great way to use what you have on that stamp set. And then same thing, sprinkling on that embossing powder, and then I'll line that back up in my Misty, just gently and carefully trying to prep that other side since I did touch it and may have fingerprints on there, so that just kind of helps remove any excess oil or anything I had on my hands. And then sprinkling more of the embossing powder on, making sure there is nothing extra in between the leaves, and if there is, you can just brush that away with a paintbrush or any little brush that you may have on hand. And then I'll go ahead and heat that up with my heat tool as well, and that'll melt that white embossing powder, and I'll set this off on the side to cool for just a little bit. One thing I really like to do is take a Swiffer cloth and just run it over that paper to remove any of that excess powder from the anti-static powder tool. So that's a really great way to do that. Now we're going to do some ink blending. So I'm going to start with my leaves. I'm using cracked pistachio and peacock feathers, and I really love this combination for leaves. It just gives it a little bit of a different green tone to it. So I'm starting off with my finger dabbers, and I'm laying down a color of cracked pistachio with ink blending. I have found that laying down my lightest color first really helps blend the colors together. So I laid that cracked pistachio down first, and then I'm coming in with the peacock feathers just on one side. I just wanted to have a little bit of a two-tone effect. And I can just lay that off on the side. The finger dabbers make this really easy to control how much ink you're putting down. And then what I'll do is just kind of go back and forth between the two colors, making sure that there's a nice smooth blend on there. And then you can come in with a cloth or Kleenex, paper towel, and just rub off any of that excess ink, and that white embossing powder is going to pop back through. So I will do the same thing for the flowers. I'm using Festive Berries and spun sugar. And I will use the finger dabbers for this too. I'm starting with that lightest color and going over the entire floral image. I wanted the darkest part to be in the center and the lightest to the outside. So that's also why it helps a lot to have that lightest color down first, because then you know that you have it there, that you're not, that you didn't blend too much. And then I'm going to come in with the Festive Berries. Now you can see that's really bright. My ink pad was super juicy, so I did actually edit this footage quite a bit. It took me a little bit of work to really blend that out, but I did go back and forth quite a bit between the Festive Berries and the spun sugar. It works out in the end, but you just want to be careful. Maybe tap off on your craft mat first with that darkest color before going to your paper in case your ink pad is super juicy like mine was. So it just took a little bit of extra work, but I think it worked out really well in the end. And then I'll do the same thing. I'm just going to take a cloth and buffer off that excess ink, and that white embossing powder will resist that, so it'll pop back through on the flowers. And then you can take the coordinating die, and I like to hold mine in place with some Post-it tape. And with Pretty Pink Posh's dies, they cut pretty close to the edge, so any of that excess ink that was off on the side isn't going to show a lot. Now to work on my sentiment quick, since I kind of had my embossing powder out, I'm using this really cute banner from Angel Friends. I thought this would work perfect for just a simple sentiment from the front of my card. So I'm using some black cardstock that I prepped with the anti-static powder tool. And I'm going to stamp this banner down first. So I'm just giving that a nice impression, sprinkling on the embossing powder. And I want to make sure there is no excess powder in that middle banner portion, because that's where my sentiment's going to go. So I want to make sure that that is really clean. A nice thin paintbrush works really well here. And then I can go ahead and heat this up. And I'll melt that embossing powder. And then I'm going to line this back up in the MISTI to stamp the sentiment. So this sentiment is also off of the Angel Friends stamp set, and I wanted to curve it like my banner. So I'm taking the plastic sheet that's actually with the stamp set, and I'm lining that over the top so I can curve my stamp. The first time I had done this, I was playing with it a little bit before off camera. It worked really well. I don't think I cleaned my stamp good enough. It didn't want to stick very well for me, so I did have to get my head in there a little bit, line it up, and then I can close the door to pick up that stamp set, and it'll stay in the shape that I had it. And I can remove that acetate cardstock that was kind of holding that in place for me. Ink that up with the Versamark ink and put some white embossing powder on there. Now you want to be careful when you're coming back with the heat tool, because if you reheat the banner portion too much, it's kind of going to melt away. It's not going to stand out as much. So you want to make sure that your heat tool is really hot so you can just go right to it and heat it up. Now I'm just kind of getting my base together. So I have some red cardstock here is going to be my main base, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I have white cardstock that is measuring 4 by 5 1/4, and I went ahead and attached those. Now for all of my flowers here that I have laid out, I'm attaching these to a piece of fog cardstock, and this is cut to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And I don't want to attach this yet because I want to trim off any overhang there is for my flowers. So I'm kind of just getting an idea where I want all of these to go, placing the leaves in here, making sure that there's enough room and some space in between. So I'm just kind of tucking those leaves underneath, and I can move them if I want. And like I said, this color combination I thought was just a really pretty color combination for a Christmas card. Something a little bit different, not quite so pine green, which is really pretty, but I like to kind of step out of the box a little bit. So to make sure I'm kind of keeping my alignment, I'm going to go ahead and attach my leaves while it's still sitting in the position that I want. And you see I did tuck under some blue, just a scrap piece of blue paper there to catch any excess glue that might seep through. It just saves me time from having to clean up my mat later. These pieces of scratch paper I pick up are really cheap, so I can just toss this when I'm done. So I'm just using the liquid glue and some tweezers to get all of that attached, and then I can come back in and add the flowers to them, and then right back to the card. And I'll go through and do the same thing for everything on there, and I can trim off the excess that's hanging over the edge. I am trying to save those pieces because what you can do if you have room is add those to the side of the card, so it looks a little more natural, like you didn't plan it. So that's what I did here at the very top, and then I'm just going to trim off that little bit there. And I think this just makes a really great background. You could also stamp directly and do this. I just think that die cutting them just adds a really nice touch. And then I'm coming in with the banner, so I'm just kind of getting an idea where I want that lined up. And I'm going to add some foam squares to this for just a little bit of dimension. I have some black foam squares here that I'm just cutting in half to fit my banner. The black foam squares is nice because since this is a black strip of cardstock, if people look at it from the side, it's not going to stick out very much. So then I could go ahead and attach that to the front of the card. And for a little bit of sparkle, I'm adding Silver Moon Dust Nouveau Drops. I'm going to go through and add those to the middle of the flowers that are showing all around the card. Probably should have waited till the very end to do that, just so you don't stick your arm in it if you're doing anything else to the card. But you can see there's a lot of sparkle in those. And this is the new holiday mix from Pretty Pink Posh. It is gorgeous. You got some red, greens, and some white jewels in here. And I just went ahead and added the white jewels around the empty spaces of my card. The other colors are super gorgeous, but I figured I already had enough color in here, so I just did the white jewels, and I think they turned out beautiful. I hope you enjoyed this card today. Thank you so much for joining me. I will have all of the supplies listed down below in the video description and on my blog as well. If you did enjoy this, please give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll catch you next time.